Hey everyone, welcome to today's edition of One Single Story, where each weekday we tackle a single relevant question based on our Bible reading for that day. This week, our reading is centered around the book of Romans, and today I'm joined by Alyssa Bream and Jay Rivenbark. So we're going to dive into a question from Romans chapter 12, and he begins by saying, "And so, dear brothers and sisters, I plead with you to give your bodies to God because of all He has done for you. Let them be a living and holy sacrifice, the kind He will find acceptable. This is truly the way to worship Him. Don't copy the behavior and customs of this world, but let God transform you into a new person by changing the way that you think. Then you will learn to know God's will for you, which is good and pleasing and perfect." So what I want to talk about is, what does it mean to give our bodies to God as a sacrifice?
It can be both things we do or choose not to do. There's this practical application of the body as a sacrifice. What I do with this body, literally what I see, what I choose to listen to, what enters my mind, what comes out of my mouth or doesn't, all can be sacrifices to God. We've talked a lot about the mind and all that goes on there. That's a part of the body. I think even the mere fact of taking care of the body we've been given, he says our bodies are the temple of the Holy Spirit, is an aspect of worship. Whether we're doing a good job of that, whether we, confession time, whether we eat wisely or not, whether we get enough rest, all that is one application. And then there's a whole nother application. What do we do with the body? How do we use it sacrificially for the kingdom? Literally, where do I go and what do I do? How do I help and empower and encourage other people? Can be a whole nother application of that, what it means to give our bodies a sacrifice.
I think as you read on in the chapter, you see some of the things that are part of being a living sacrifice, blessing those who persecute you. If you're a teacher, teach well. Like, all of those are parts of it. And I think it's the personal responsibility we each have in our walk with Christ. When we were in Israel and we went to I don't remember which location we were in, but the guy told us that this is where they would do child sacrifices. Mm-hmm. And I think in Israel, it kind of really clicked that the child sacrifices that were the norm in the ancient times, that, they gave up something so that was very precious to them, so that their deity, whichever deity they worshipped, would notice them, would love them and give them blessings. That is, I think, a large part of why God sacrificed His Son for us. And I never really put those two together. I don't know if that's just the way my mind thinks, that it was just so normal that I knew that Jesus died for me, that it just never kind of clicked. And so in Micah, we see the question is asked, shall I give my firstborn for my sin? And then what is true? And oh goodness, I didn't write down the right words, and this is the last podcast of the day. What does Yahweh require? Mm-hmm. is the question, and it's act justly, love mercy, and walk humbly. And man, if you can do those three things in your life, I think you are a living sacrifice, because you're denying your own ambitions when they conflict with what is good for others around you. You're loving mercy. You're not just giving mercy grudgingly. You're actually grateful and love it when you see people that have fallen do well in life. I think that is where I go with this living sacrifice. The fruit of the Spirit is the other part that I think, if you look at the rest of the chapter, that list is kind of condensed into the fruit of the Spirit in Galatians.
One of the things I noted is verse 11, where he said, never be lazy, but work hard and serve the Lord enthusiastically. I think it's a very practical way that we
give our body.
Absolutely.
Well, this concept, Jesus would talk about, if you want to follow me, you've got to take up your cross, which was a sign of death. you got to lay down your life. If you want to gain your life, you got to lay down your life. You got to give up your life. And even here he talks about um, letting God transform you by changing the way that you think. So previously this week we talked about the power of the mind and the influence that it has on our bodies. So for me, this verse this year is very. These two verses are very important. So in my prayer time, I have some specific things I'm praying for every day, and for some of them, I've added Bible verses. And one of the things that I have been praying every day this year is for the Lord to help me to have less screen time and more rest. Two places that are easy for me to get out of balance, and one can keep me from doing the other. And to have some focused times of rest, which I don't do, where I lay everything aside. And after I pray that, I read these two verses because, verse 2 begins by saying, don't copy the behaviors and customs of this world. Current behaviors and customs of this world are very engrossed in our screens and very rest averse. We're busy. And if we're not careful, either because we want to fit in or because they're addictive or because it's the norm, we find ourselves consumed by nonstop communication and information, just no break from it. And busy all the time because we feel like we've got to meet a quota or impress somebody or meet whatever. And I would say that's different for everybody. I would say it's a norm in busyness, which creates a lack of rest, and way too much information usually coming from our screens, or something that trips up lots of people in our current culture. But maybe for somebody else, not copying some behaviors and customs of this world might be different, or what. So for me, if you ask me right now what the struggle for my body to be a sacrifice to the Lord would be, I would say my intake of information, a screen most of the time. It's not from reading books. I do read, but that's not. I've never heard anybody say I read a book too much, and my lack of rest, you know, and neither, and not just, and I don't mean sleep as much as I mean I am the world's worst at disconnecting from the world, from everything. And I think if I had to answer that question, where does God want me for my body to be more of a sacrifice to Him? I would say it would be in those two areas. But I think it's different for other people. The things where you need to give your body to God may be different than mine. I don't know. But I think I don't disagree with things like the fruit of the Spirit. As a matter of fact, I heard somebody say the other day, and I don't remember what I was listening to, but they said if people could take Proverbs and the fruit of the Spirit and live that out, you would be nearly a perfect Christian. And I think that everybody's struggle of crucifying the flesh, because I don't even know here that he's talking so much about hands, feet, full body, as much as he is the flesh, that we struggle to turn over to the Lord.
One of the things, I don't think I'd ever made the connection until we were pondering the question along with the passage where he talks about being happy with those who are happy, weep with those who weep, live in harmony, and enjoy the company of ordinary people, that it spoke to me in the context as it relates to giving God our bodies, that sometimes that sacrifice of this body is for me to be present for and with other people.
Mm-hmm.
And that requires time and intentionality, giving up something that I may want to do or someplace I want to be. But when I'm doing that, that's actually a sacrifice back to Him. And I'd never really thought of it in those terms before, just being present for and with other people.
Even in the Old Testament, in 2 Samuel, it says to obey is better than to sacrifice.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that the living sacrifice is a lot of obedience to what we feel God is calling us to do. Screen time might be something that 85% of the church struggles with, but because you have nailed that down as what you feel like God wants you to work on right now, for you to ignore that would be more detrimental than somebody who maybe is at a different point in their life where they're dealing with another issue that
Right.
God is working on them with. And screen time is something that can wait to deal with, because that's not the issue they need to deal with in their life.
And it's so easy to justify those things, because, my wife would tell you, you're on your phone a lot. She said, but I know the majority of what you're doing isn't just goofing off, I mean, in a previous podcast that we've recorded today, my phone rang 15 times, in a 15-minute period. So it's not that I'm just goofing off, but it also is in that there's can become over self-reliance, the desire to be needed, to feel important, all of those things, that you can do. And we can, Paul writes somewhere about becoming weary and well doing. For some reason, I think it's in Galatians, but I'm not 100% sure. But he talks about don't get weary and well doing. We can do things for good reasons, be genuinely motivated by them, but ruin our physical bodies or our mind that keeps us from doing that long term, where we wear out and wear thin. Well, thank you for joining us today on this edition of One Single Story. We hope you'll be back with us next week as we begin a conversation around the book of 1 Corinthians.